In a world still emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine has upended the fragile recovery of the global economy, which is now grappling with a sharp deceleration in economic growth. This sharp slowdown in growth, coupled with rising inflation, is reminiscent of the stagflation that we witnessed in the 1970s. While both rich and poor countries are being hit by the slowdown, developing and emerging economies are more vulnerable. Rising inequality and security challenges within and among countries exacerbate the risks of divisions and restrain economic and social development. Finding viable solutions to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor has become a strategic imperative for governments, regional bodies, and international organizations. Soaring prices are affecting households and central banks alike, multiplying the challenges that are facing lawmakers. Many countries are grappling with rising inflation rates as pandemic-related supply chain disruptions push up prices, exacerbated by geopolitical tensions. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has also set off an energy crisis, particularly in Europe. So how can we ensure that financial systems move from commitments to action? To reduce the risk of history repeating itself, what can we learn from comparable situations in the past? This session will address the headwinds and tailwinds facing the global economy and explore a broader set of foundations for growth to ensure long-term economic prosperity. Now, to discuss these issues and more, I'd like to introduce our panel of esteemed speakers. Saleem Mandviwalla is a senator, chief whip and Saleem Mandviwalla is a senator, chief whip and former minister of finance of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Livio Manzini is our next guest. Now, he's the chairman and CEO of Bell Holding. He's also the head of the Italian Chamber of Commerce, which I was just informed is one of the oldest Italian chambers of commerce outside of Italy itself. And our next guest is Wosko Maciej. He's the editor-in-chief of Gazeta Bankowa, a magazine covering the finance, banking, and insurance industries. And last but certainly not least is Yusuf Abdullayev. He's the head of the Export and Investment Promotion Agency of the Republic of Azerbaijan. A warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us at the TRT World Forum. Senator, if I could begin with you. Obviously, as I mentioned, the global economy is facing a number of significant challenges at the moment. The world is still emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic, but now we've got the added pressure that the conflict in Ukraine has brought upon us. I mentioned that emerging economies, such as Pakistan's, could be particularly vulnerable at this time, especially in your country, which has suffered some horrific flooding, historic flooding in the south of the country. Can you explain to us how Pakistan is coping with these myriad challenges at this crossroads right now?
I would like to thank you for inviting me. I would like to thank you for inviting me to this esteemed forum of TRT. Definitely, there are serious economic challenges to the world, and especially to the developing countries like Pakistan. And after the COVID, the moment we came over COVID, we had the flood situation in Pakistan. So it was one crisis after the other. And it's a continuing struggle, and we are still struggling today. We had to go to the IMF, we had to go to the multilateral agencies, we have to restructure our debt. And the world is also hurting economically, which does not help us, either. So countries which are developing countries and which are facing crisis of climate change and others, they are really struggling hard. And it's not easy to govern a country like this, which is economically struggling. And but we are trying, and with the help of our allies and our friends, we are able to, put the economy back in order somehow. And it will definitely take us some time for Pakistan to recover from what it was 5 years ago or 7 years ago. So it is definitely a challenge for us.
Livio Manzini, I'd like to get your perspective now as one of the captains of industry based in Istanbul right now. Explain to us what Bell Holding does and what challenges that your company has faced in the wake of the pandemic and now the conflict in Ukraine.
First of all, let me also thank TRT World for the invitation to attend this panel. Auskar, of course, the point of view of a company like Bell Holding is clearly very restricted. We are an industrial company. We are a B2B company, and therefore very much part of supply chains. We make packaging material for consumer products. And in some cases because we service also the pharma world, you may say that it is an essential part of the economy. And therefore we managed to keep going throughout the pandemic. Having said that, what is really happening is a much larger disruption. And when you look at the pandemic, the war in Russia and other political developments, geopolitical developments, we are talking about a major disruption. And we've had disruptions in the past as well. I mean, the internet, for instance, was a huge disruption. There are always in disruptions, there are winners and losers, so threats and opportunities. On balance, though, the technological disruptions have proved positive. I mean, they have added value, created value. In particular, globalization at the end of the ideological wars of the second half of the 20th century, globalization has really lifted billions of people out of poverty in developing countries, whilst keeping the developed economies, consumers happy with zero inflation and a good choice of products. But these latest disruptions, I'm afraid, as you mentioned, are bringing us a period maybe of lose-lose, and it requires a lot of attention and skill to navigate in these waters. Certainly my attention right now is very much focused on keeping the business afloat, but navigating treacherous waters is one thing. What the world needs is new investment, is new job creation, is new trading opportunities. At the Italian Chamber of Commerce, for 137 years, we've been operating on the bilateral relationship between Turkey and Italy, and of course the EU and Turkey, I should say, and we've been successful. I mean, last year was a record year. This year we're going to beat that record in terms of bilateral trade. But in terms of new investment, creating new jobs, obviously this is proving a harder sell right now, but the opportunities are there. And it's a difficult period, but I am clearly, as an industrialist, I have to be an optimist and always see the glass half full. Thank you.
Okay, Wosko, Maciej, I'd like to bring you in now, because as a fellow journalist, we report day in, day out on basically everything that happens in the world. But you're based in Poland, and Poland, as we know, has been one of the largest recipients of Ukrainian refugees, for example. So you have that direct first-hand experience of how a conflict is really having an impact in your own country. But explain to us more broadly, what are the short and long-term impacts of something like a conflict in a neighboring country, as well as the pandemic? Do you believe that the world economy is coping with those two issues right now?
Thank you for the very interesting question, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. First of all, I want to say that the whole of Europe and the whole world has to face the simultaneous occurrence of several variables which we call black swans. Black Swan was supposed to be a theoretical event, surprising, unpredictable, and seemed unreal. The COVID-19 pandemic and the global lockdown breaking all supply chains and have shown that black swans exist. Never before in history there were so many black swans at one moment, so many events affecting the economic policy at the same time and with such an intensity. So we don't have any theoretical models to fight them. The Polish, like you said, the Polish economy coped best in Europe with the effects of pandemic. As now we can see from the latest macroeconomic data. The Poland also coping well with effects of the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis related to it. It's, I think, I must say that the Polish government was one of the first in Europe to launch a system of financial shields for business and companies fighting with first hits of broken supply chains. And from the very beginning of the pandemic crisis, we are trying to protect economic potential and survive until the global storms come down. It's important to say that Poland entered the COVID crisis on a hot economic engine. Historically low unemployment rate, growing GDP, a stable budget, and stable monetary policy based on its own currency, Polish zloty. It worked. There is a good chance that Poland, as one of the few European countries, will avoid recession in the next year. Although increase will be only about 1.5% GDP. But compared to many other EU countries that will experience recession, it will be great success, especially since Poland is a frontline country and therefore exposed to various additional additional risks resulting from the war beyond our eastern border. I think the key for this situation we are in Europe and in whole of the world, the key is cooperation between all the countries with economic policy. Cooperation in helping Ukraine, cooperation in digitalization and in development after pandemic, and cooperation with the green energy transformation leading to economic security. This economic security, I think it is the last year, it's changed from the security to defending, economic and energy defending of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Wosko. Yusuf Abdullayev, as the head of the Export and Investment Promotion Agency of Azerbaijan, I'd like to ask you about Azerbaijan more broadly. It's a country that's blessed with great natural resources. In fact, we are seeing more countries, including the European Union, for example, signing deals with Azerbaijan now for natural gas. I'm wondering, is an economy like yours, is it coping better than others because of that mineral wealth?
Well, that is a very good question. I also would like to say thank you to organizers for having us and inviting us yesterday for opening ceremony and for this panel with this esteemed panelist. Well, actually, yeah, so we're not a big country, we're a small country, Azerbaijan, as you said, but it affects us in both ways, negatively and positively, as you said, because we have oil and gas resources. So these resources, actually, we had a very good cooperation with all our neighbors, and not only the neighbors, with EU countries, with Asian countries, with everybody. But when you look at, and I would like to say, like example, the Italy, one of the main partner in EU. And the Italy, our turnover for last year was at $10 billion, but for this 11 months, I think we have a $13, $14 billion. So, and why? Because, of course, it's an increasing of gas supply to Italy. But, of course, we have another part of this coin. We have a border with Russia. And, of course, we have an oil and gas export, and we have a non-oil and gas export. And of course, it affects our non-oil and gas export because in terms of the situation, and of course we have a very good cooperation and relationship with the Ukraine as well. So our state oil company, Auskar, which is very active in Turkey as well, because Azerbaijan is the biggest foreign investor in Turkey. So we had a very big investment in Italy, in the Ukraine, and in Russia as well. So just imagine when we have the situation, so it affects you in let's say, in a positively and negatively. But as I've said, in terms of increasing our non-oil and gas export, of course, it affected us very negatively. But for oil and gas, as you correctly mentioned, this July we signed the papers, the memorandum with EU about the increasing of gas supply in the future, and of course we as a country do our best to provide and to support our European countries and partners for this gas supply. But at the end of the day, when you, of course our country, we earn the money from that. This is very good for our country, and our GDP is doing very well. Our growth, it's like something 6.57%, and I think it's very good figures. But nevertheless, unfortunately, it happens, the situation, and when we have a neighboring country, as a big country, as a Russia, with all the situation, with all these borders, so of course it affects you in negatively way as well. But as a country, we're trying to do our best, and as our investment promotion agency, we're trying to find the right way and right niche for our potential investors, for our exporters. But I've said it's very easy to say, but not easy to do. So we're trying to do our best.
Senator, before the pandemic, Pakistan was being identified as one of the emerging economies to watch. Pakistan has a dynamic population, a dynamic, young and educated population. And of course, sadly, the pandemic hit Pakistan as well as the rest of the world. And as you mentioned in your initial remarks, you've now turned to the International Monetary Fund in order to get a line of credit. How, in your view, can Pakistan emerge from the economic problems that it's facing now? Does it have to look beyond its borders to countries like China, for example, to help boost its own reserves?
Definitely, right now, actually, we are in a restructuring process, and we need to restructure our debt, and our trade deficits are high. So we are looking at all these angles. No doubt, before the COVID, we were doing extremely well. We had a growth like 6%, and suddenly after the COVID, we went into a negative growth, which really put things in a different perspective. So now, and then after that, this climate change situation and the floods in Pakistan, this has really put us in a difficult position. And even in the climate change conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, this issue was raised that the country is suffering because of climate change, and Pakistan is one of them, is really having to face difficulties which we never imagined. And many parts of the country is still underwater, and we can't get, things are not going back to normal in the country, and people are evacuated from their homes, and we are struggling. We are in a situation where we have to bring normal life in the country. So these priorities right now are different for Pakistan, but definitely we want to go back to our growth of 6%, which we had before COVID, and we need to do some serious restructuring in our debt, and talk to the multilaterals, and that is why we have engaged with IMF also. So I am quite hopeful that we'll come around, but this, you can say this double jeopardy of COVID and floods has really put Pakistan in a difficult position. But nevertheless, China, United States, our Arab friends, our European allies, everybody understands our issues, and they are coming to help us in whichever way they can. Even Turkey has been in the front to support Pakistan to overcome this flood crisis in Pakistan. So I'm sure after things have improved internally, we will get better.
Livio, can I follow up with you on one of the Senator's points, the issue of climate change? It seems that in the wake of the conflict we're seeing in Ukraine, the issue of climate change is taken a bit of a back seat as countries, particularly in Western Europe, scramble for any energy source they can find, even if it is in fossil fuels. As someone who runs quite a vast business, how has the issue of climate change affected your operations, and what sort of impact, excuse me, what sort of impact does this issue have in terms of your business going forward? Is it something that you actively plan for and consider?
Thank you, Auskar, for the question. This is, of course, is a very relevant topic and question. Right now, arguably, it is the main issue of the planet. Every single company is just a drop of water, but then it adds up to the big picture. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine, as you rightly say, has brought the issue a bit on a back seat, and it is a shame, because clearly the planet is not waiting for the war to finish. Things are continuing to move. So global warming is continuing. At the recent COP meeting, it was in Egypt. They were about to abandon the objective of 1.5 degree. Fortunately, they backtracked. But clearly, right now, there isn't that much optimism that these ceilings are not going to be breached sooner rather than later. And then it becomes exponential. So we all have a duty to participate. As our company is concerned, we are, for instance, in Turkey, we've been the first for-profit organization to sign the Ellen MacArthur Foundation New Plastic Economy Global Commitment, aiming to have a zero environmental footprint by 2025. And we've also made a commitment to halve our carbon emissions, so our carbon footprint by half by 2030. Clearly, giving these targets is easy. The act of giving a target itself costs nothing. But unless you are doing greenwashing, then you have to start getting everybody in the organization behind it. In our particular case, we got the people in the organization behind it before declaring the target. So we picked targets that are achievable. It's important to pick targets that are achievable, otherwise people will give up before you even start. But it has to come together with obviously the policies of governments, and governments have a big role to play there. Now, as you know, in the European Union, over a period of time, a carbon trading system has been put in place. Initially, the price of carbon was very low, but then it has gone up, it has struggled, but it is getting there, or it seems to, at least, I cannot judge. Clearly, a carbon trading system together with a price for carbon, so getting who is polluting to pay, at the same time also encouraging people to invest or giving them also the resources to invest, is going to make a difference. And the country where we are, Turkey, has a fantastic potential for alternative sources of energy. I mean, non-fossil fuel, solar, hydro, and wind. And I'm not great with statistics, and of course it's not necessarily my prerogative, but the figures are very encouraging. And if a country like Turkey can do it, other countries can do it as well. The percentage of energy that is generated in Turkey right now from renewable sources is going up very fast. Still a long road to go. We, for instance, are building a new factory, and clearly the roof has already been designed to accommodate solar panels. The quality of the solar panels has increased, so you can generate more energy. So there is also a technological progress that accompanies it. Obviously, hybrid cars and then full electric cars. So there are a lot of possibilities, but everybody has to chip in, so to say. It's not going to happen on its own. Thank you.
Wosko, the issue of inflation is what everyone around the world seems to be talking about right now. We know many countries around the world are experiencing record inflation, and the conventional wisdom has been for central banks to raise interest rates in order to make borrowing more expensive, and that will in turn slow down the economy, slow down demand, and that will hopefully bring down prices. And we're seeing that being led by the US Federal Reserve. It's continuing to raise interest rates. But some countries like Turkey, for example, are taking a different approach. Can I ask you, what do you make of the issue of raising interest rates? Is that the silver bullet that will fix inflation across the globe? Because obviously the other side to that is, as economies slow down, we could be facing a global recession because of that course of action, and many people could also lose their jobs.
Thank you for the question. Mr. Manzini said about the optimism. I think the optimism and pessimism are two emotions that drives the economic policy in our whole world from few months or from 2 years from the pandemic. And about the question, the president of the Polish National Bank communicates that the central bank in Poland will act not pessimistically nor optimistically, trying to find a golden mean. Of course, this is due to the relatively good situation of the Polish economy. Now we have 3-month break in monetary policy tightening, but it's only break. What will be next, I don't know. I'm sure that if someone can say what kind of monetary policy of central banks is right, is the most appropriate, so he can go and get the Nobel Prize. Today, Poland still have the historically lowest unemployment rate, increasing foreign direct investments, a stable banking market, and low, compared to many richer countries, debt. We are entering the fight against inflation and the economic slowdown with solid public finances. I think that in the last 2 years we managed to protect the labor market. Now it's time for investments. Also investments resulting from the government's industrial policy and with the use of support, including support from the European Union. Poland is still waiting for funds from the Next Generation EU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility for our national recovery plan. But I'm optimistic.
It's a good way to be. Yusuf, can I pick up on Wosko's mention of investments? Obviously, we're at a time when many countries are consumed with spending money in their own economy to try to help their own people cope with rising prices, be it food prices or energy prices. But foreign direct investment is still important, isn't it? It still needs to be encouraged, but with less investment out there, how can you possibly boost foreign direct investment in this current economic climate?
Yeah, very good question. Actually, everybody's talking about the war between Russia and Ukraine, but I think there is another war for FDI, because, and we are their IPA. We see that we're the members of all this big organization which stands for promotion or for indirect investment. And of course, I don't want to use this upbeat phrase that FDI is very important for any economy, for any country. In order to develop your country, you need to keep the flow of FDI. I'm talking about the inward FDI. But of course, it's not easy to do in these circumstances. But as Azerbaijan, nevertheless, we're trying to do our best, because we have a very good, a lot of work has been done in terms of giving incentives for foreign investors, for creating very good incentives and opportunities for the companies, for the foreign companies, for the local companies, and of course in terms of creating new industrial zones, free economic zones, and giving all this kind of incentives. But of course, FDI flow, we see, actually we're enjoying the increasing of FDI to our country. When we compare 2022, 2021, it's increased. But of course, it challenges us in that way that all the situation which surrounding us with all this war and of course the pandemic years, we cannot say that the pandemic is absolutely over. And but what we see the increasing, we see the changing the ways and the mentality of some big foreign investors which cannot enter some countries and would like to prefer to choose another country. So in these circumstances, of course, we're doing, as IPA, doing our best to see what we can do to attract more and more in FDI. And as I've said, it's critically important for any country. Of course, and from one hand, it's money, it's long money, it's creating new jobs, but on the other hand, it's of course it's a transfer of technology as well. So we are doing our best, trying to do our best to to find the solutions in this hard time, how we can increase the flow of FDI in our country, and I think we manage it, because at the end of the day, everybody's looking at the figures.
Yes.
And on the papers, we see the increasing, and we do believe that we will remain the same level.
Senator, Pakistan has been looking to forge closer ties with China, the world's second largest economy and I guess America's biggest rival right now. In terms of that partnership, what is Pakistan looking to get out of China? Because we know that as Western powers such as the United States focus on other regions in the world, Beijing is stepping up in order to, I guess, engage with countries like Pakistan that have somewhat been neglected in terms of the West. So are you positive about this relationship with China? How do you see it going forward?
Let me I think we have very good relations with the West and with China. China, of course, we have a border. It's our neighbor. So, you know, that makes a difference in having a trade relation or an investment relation with a country which has a border with you comparatively with a country which is thousands of miles away from you. So, but at the same time, if you look at China and US relations, even I call it a love and hate relationship, but even then their trade goes on, their business goes on, and they are not, I don't feel there is a lot of change. You know, there's a lot of talk about it, but there's not much change in their relationship, because I don't think they can survive without each other. And similarly, as China is on our border and it can support us much more, I think, effectively than other countries, investment-wise or trade-wise or otherwise. So obviously, that's our first choice. And having connectivity, road connectivity, and sea connectivity now, it's much more easier for us to work with China. So it's not a preference really. It's just the location and the advantage of you know, reaching China within few hours by road. It makes a difference. But I feel with China we have progressed a lot, and we continue to progress with them in future. And we are also getting support from them as far as the flood is concerned in a great way. They are also helping us because majority of our debt is with China. So we are in discussion with them to restructure our debt. So I feel, but at the same time, United States and Europe are also supporting us in the best way they can. So I cannot say really that, you know, one is better than the other. And I feel that right now, in the situation the world is in, like all of my colleagues here mentioned, the energy crisis, the food crisis, and if you saw the opening of this session, you know, it was wheat. Wheat was the opening of the session. That, you know, food, big energy challenge in the world today. You cannot find gas today in the world, you know, if you want to, because of the war and the Russian crisis, because of the energy going on. So, you know, all this complicates and makes things more difficult for a country like Pakistan, which is struggling. But nevertheless, you know, we are able to deal with all our allies and all our countries. And I think it will be okay.
Livio, to ask you about China as well, the country is still seen as the world's factory. It exports an untold number of goods to the rest of the world. But under China's strict zero COVID policy, we've seen that having a huge impact not only on the Chinese economy itself, but as the snap lockdowns occurred, the export of goods was also impeded, which meant that the rest of the world couldn't get those goods, further pushing up prices. But as we've seen in recent days, Beijing has announced a significant relaxation of that strict policy. Are you hopeful that with the easing of China's zero COVID policy, that perhaps we can see a return to some sense of normalcy in terms of global trade?
Well, Auskar, of course, in order to properly answer your question, we have to look at the scale of the issue. I mean, for instance, the bilateral trade between China and the US is of such a scale that it requires, in terms of numbers, that it requires, of course, mega factories, mega production centers. Everything I say is obviously affected by the fact that I am myself an industrialist. Clearly, in the world of business, you also have services, you have other things. So I tend to be a little bit more focused on manufacturing, on industrialists, but that's where the most of the jobs are as well. Not necessarily most of the value creation these days, but still, a big chunk of the economy. Now, there has been, and it predates COVID, a political will, and I'm not here to judge it, whether it's correct or not, but very clearly, first from the US and then from the EU, to be less dependent, let's say, on factory China, as you defined it. And that predates COVID. Clearly, COVID exacerbated this and made the politicians who were advocating this for geostrategic reasons, made them even more correct in a sense, because the supply chains, in particular from the Far East, froze up. Now, if we are, say, in a sense of thawing of these supply chains, it is probably not going to change the underlying policy, because the underlying policy is not just geostrategic. Long supply chains also have, in terms of shipping and so on, a greater impact on the planet. So in terms of carbon footprint, long supply chains are not positive, and the big multinationals, which are behind the effort of reducing carbon footprint, etc., are, paying attention to this. So nearshoring is also a result of sustainability issues, not just geostrategic ones. Then, of course, it has come to the realization that in order not to incur the freezing up of the supply chains, unless you have a closer base or a more secure one, you are going to have to have bigger stocks. There's no other alternative. And these companies, I mean the big companies, no longer have the possibility, either financial or will, to build up the stocks of all the materials that are necessary. They might not even have the square meters. And so the shifting of the supply chains to friendlier shores is going to continue. From that point of view, for instance, Turkey is likely to be a big winner, and it's already happening. Because in order to, first of all, you cannot do it short term. These decisions are longer term decisions. You do not move a factory just for 1 year. When you decide to move a production base or a supplier, you, in particular, if you're looking to a certain scale, you are making a commitment for 5, 7, maybe 10 years going forward. These are not easy decisions, but once they're taken, you have to stick by them. So you have to move to a place which can give you the scale, so the manufacturing base with the required scale, the people, so the technical expertise, everything else that goes around it, so rule of, the legal, the commercial, legal infrastructure, the financial infrastructure, the hub, the transportation, the logistics. And when you add all them up, you have very few countries that tick all the boxes. Turkey is certainly one of them. I don't want to say it's the only one. I just operate here and I can see it. But there must be others, but there aren't so many. And therefore, this shift, even with the thawing, is not going to disappear. Of course, again, we're talking scale. I mean, China is now, first of all, it has a huge internal market. China is no longer producing for export. It also has now a huge middle class. I mean, we're talking about more than 1 billion people. Even if the middle class is only, say, 10%, it's 100 million, you know. It's now a huge internal market. And a lot of international companies are now dependent on the internal market of China, on the Chinese consumer. Clearly, luxury companies, Italian ones, French ones, are one of them, but cars and so on. So there is this interdependence. The interdependence which will not disappear, but the shift of not depending so much for our own survival will continue the same way that Europe basically in recent years was dependent on cheap labor from the Far East and cheap gas from Russia. And that's over as well. So we're talking about disruptions, and these trends are not going to change very fast. Even if the war ends tomorrow, the Germans and the Europeans will not want to be so dependent on Russian oil and gas going forward. I don't know if I have answered your question. But
no, you have, yeah. Thank you. Wosko, the supply chain disruptions that Livio mentioned that were blamed on the pandemic have been blamed for the inflation that we're seeing now. But some critics are also saying that many businesses and companies now are taking advantage of that and are raising prices beyond what is reasonable, taking advantage of the supply chain disruptions in order basically to make more profits. And all of us in the audience are probably, we walk into a supermarket, we're paying more for groceries, we walk into H&M or Zara and clothes are a lot more expensive now. To what extent do you believe are companies now profiting from this inflationary environment?
Of course, companies are profiting, but the problems with supply chains is a challenge for them in the same time. So the change in supply chains is very big and deeply goes to the big companies, big international companies. And I want to say about the competitiveness from between Europe, United States, Asia, because we must talk more, I think, about biggest organizations, not only about the companies, biggest organizations, biggest economic organizations. When we talk about it, and we see this American new law for the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. So when I first time heard about IRA, I said, okay, welcome to deglobalization. It's the very big impact to world economic, the global economic. I think that these processes are naturally evokes, once again, emotions, and in this case, anger. We had the same problem in Europe with Germany. Bundestag allocated 200 billion euro to protect German companies and citizens against high energy prices, inflation for the next step. Other European countries are not able to allocate such a budget for support. It naturally evokes emotions and anger. The global economy, and even we are talking about companies or we are talking about economic organizations, about the biggest organizations like Europe, United States and China, operates on the principle of connected vessels. So when we are talking in Europe now about new law for European Union with program of large subsidies favoring European industry, I understand it. It's reaction for another programs in another places in the world. In the same time, it's another problem. In the same time, we are talking in EU Parliament about electric cars from 2035. What's about the competitiveness of the European economic in the global economic? In the same time, Poland calls for legislative actions for gas price cap at a level acceptable for final consumers. This discussion in European Union has been going for 8-9 weeks now. What is said, and the energy industry will change, it's obvious. The supplies of natural resources, gas, oil, and their use in energy sector will decrease. Maybe not as fast as some of European colleagues wants, but I want to my point of view is that is one construction who will lead the energy economy the next years. Poland announces the constructions of 3 nuclear power plants, and China plans to build 150 nuclear reactors in the next 15 years. It's more than the rest of the world has built in last 35 years. So if you're asking me what's going to drive the world and the economic over the next few years, I think it will be nuclear energy. We did the lesson well with the green power, with the renewables. Now I think it's time for resurrection of nuclear power in economics. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Wosko. And unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I just would like to thank all of you. And also, I really do like the takeaway message that perhaps we can look forward to a more optimistic future despite what we're seeing economically and globally right now. So can we please thank our panelists, Senator Saleem Mandviwalla, Livio Manzini, Wosko Maciej, and Yusuf Abdullayev.